You need a role model, somebody who's done it. You need a mentor, somebody who is, hitting on that motivational side of things. And you need a coach, and somebody who's helping you with your road mapping and accountability. And if you have those three pillars, I think you're way better set to be able to make a really good decision. Hey guys, this is the money, this is the mindset, this is the mentoring podcast. Today we're going to talk about the DNA of a good deal. And we've got Frank Iglesias with us here. He's out of Atlanta. And man, when we were talking a lot about what it takes to make a really good buy, you had a lot of great ideas. And I was like, we got to get you on the podcast and talk about this, my friend. So thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
So the one thing that you said, which I thought was really interesting, is around the difference between the two sides of the table. And it was a really great perspective. So guys, when we're looking at this right here, what we're going to pay attention to, if you're a real estate agent, if you're a mortgage broker, if you're somebody out there looking at buy and sell real estate, this is going to help you understand about the two perspectives, the two sides of the equation of a deal. And you really did a great job. So without further ado, let's jump on describing those two perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever there's a deal, right, there's two parties involved at minimum. There's somebody selling and there's somebody buying. Sounds simple enough. But really, when we dive deeper, what we're dealing with is sales versus risk. The people selling, they might be the nicest people. They might have wonderful intentions and the kindest, most integrity-full souls of the planet. But at the end of the day, they're still selling. And because they're selling from the perspective of what do I got to do to get the person on the other side to say yes. So they're going to pitch the deal in every way possible from a sales perspective, regardless of risk. Now, they might be, again, really great people that tell you about some of the risks, but are they going to really assess every bit of it for you? No. So the risk side of the table, that's the buy side. If you're buying property, that's your job. And yes, it's wonderful to get all kinds of information, but you've got to do all your due diligence. I've seen where investors will take things at face value, and it's an old phrase, trust but verify. And if you don't verify, you might have a problem. And the number one thing you need to verify is how much risk are you really taking on? And the risk side of the table is almost always more risk than the sales side is going to portray. And too often as buyers, we'll look at a deal and go, well, I can't believe the realtor didn't tell me that. Or I can't believe the wholesaler or the seller. And it's like you're shocked. And it's like, no, their job is to sell. They're the sales side of the table. Their job is not to make sure you do your job right.
That's right. And, it reminds me back when I had a construction business, and we started it back in 2000 and I would say 2006, 2007. And we ended up shutting the doors in 2014. And those last 2 years, what happened was I started looking at things, not from when I was in the sales position, not from a perspective of like, oh my gosh, I just landed a new client. I went, oh my God, I've just absorbed more risk. And because my risk was around, is the job going to go well? Is it going to be profitable? Are they going to pay? And those are the things that we look at. And so when you're in that buying situation of buying a house, you are buying risk. And when you're a construction guy, you're basically signing up for risk. And I don't think a lot of people really look at it from that perspective. And so when you're looking at that and you're saying, okay, great. How does somebody get from, okay, now all of a sudden maybe I'm a risk averse person. How do I say, yes, it's a good idea?
Well, to say yes to a deal, it's going to go back to two things. One, experience level, right? Like the more experienced you are, the more risk you're going to be able to sniff out in a deal, right? And that just comes with time. Like you can't replace that, but you can accelerate it. And the way you accelerate it is coaching, right? You have that person looking at the deal with you. But the other thing you can also do is leverage experts, because let's say you've got a fantastic coach. Usually they're not going to do all your homework for you. That's why they're the coach. They're not doing it all. They're not investing with you. They're teaching you. When they tell you to do something, you actually have to do it. And I know that sounds elementary, but I cannot tell you how many times I've shared advice with people and so forth, and then they don't do it. And they become the next story you hear about.
Well, there's a lot of things to unpackage with what you just said, and I think it's like three major things. To me, the first of all thing is have somebody who's going to coach you through it. Now, whether you're a buyer and you're getting coached by a real estate agent, or you're a real estate agent getting coached by another person who's a professional in the industry, or whether you're a real estate agent getting coached by another, like a contractor or somebody like that. So you're getting coached by somebody to be able to handle that. So that, and coaching has a very specific use. As you said, they're not going to do it for you. They're going to identify the things that you need to do. So that's number one. And the number two is about the obligation in coaching. Well, first of all, the obligation of the coach is to give good advice. Not in the say of consulting advice, but coaching advice, which are two very different pillars. Then the obligation of the person who's receiving that is to actually do something with it. The biggest thing that we have as a problem whenever coaching somebody or learning something is that we hoard that knowledge and we actually don't do anything with that knowledge. Our obligation to success is to take that knowledge and convert it into action.
Yeah, and what happens too often with real estate, and which is why I saw someone say just the other day that the turnover rate of people that invest in real estate was actually over 90%, which I didn't know. I thought it was in the 80s, maybe 90. I think they said it was 93%. And first of all, a lot of those people don't have a coach, which is why I don't last. But when they do, here's the thing you got to keep in mind with a coach. They've got experience, they've got knowledge. It doesn't mean they're going to know every detail. But what they're going to do is they're going to give you information, and when you act on it, you're going to come to some new conclusions. You're going to find out some things. And by the way, some of the things you find out, your coach may not know about, which actually creates better dialogue to come to better conclusions and better solutions. We've all had that moment where somebody says, what? I didn't think of that. That's a great
coach because they're being honest. Yeah. I think in any time you're making a decision, and I mean, I'm not talking at the level of buying a chocolate bar at the corner store. Well, maybe I am because, it affects your health. But the idea is you need three pillars. You need a role model, somebody who's done it. You need a mentor, somebody who is, hitting on that motivational side of things. And you need a coach, somebody who's helping you with your road mapping and accountability. And if you have those three pillars, I think you're way better set to be able to make a really good decision.
Well, you bring up a really great point, and that's coach versus mentor. Because a lot of people use those words interchangeably. It's really not the same thing. Like there's people I think of in my life that are mentors. I'm not talking to them every week. I'm going to them at, every few months and chatting. Maybe it's a little bit of a pep talk. Maybe it's a celebratory talk. Maybe it's a reflection talk, depending on where I'm at. Whereas the coach is that person that's week in, week out, day in, day out, whatever that steady, consistent schedule is. Keyword being steady, consistent schedule. And they're holding you accountable. A good coach will hold you accountable. Right? Like they're going to say, dude, you need to get it together and go. And they're going to have those tough conversations. A mentor will as well, but the mentor is not, right? They're not necessarily the role model, but they could be, right? So that could intermix, but that you got to have that consistency if you're going to get a coach. Absolutely.
Would you think that the mentor would operate more at the principles level and the coach is the hybrid between the principles and the mechanics?
It's possible. For me, the mentor is that person I sit down with and I check in on the overall status of that aspect of life. So, for instance, in my spiritual life, I've got a guy that I go to and I check with him, every few months. And we just have a conversation. There's no agenda. It's, Frank, how's it going? And I tell him how it's going and we talk about things. Here's what's going great. Here's what didn't go great. Here's where I feel like I'm struggling. Here's where I feel like I'm doing. It's a high level, and then it's always geared toward all that's fine and good. How does that fit into the big picture?
Yep. Yeah.
The coach is more that, again, the day to day.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that the coach versus the mentor, the mentor is a sort of a non-structured relationship where the coach has a very formal and structured engagement process.
Generally speaking, that's going to be the case. Yeah. Yeah. People that are mentors, it's rarely, if ever, structured. It's very much a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's really important to have both of those. And then you really dovetailed in the back of that conversation. We were talking about buyers and assessing risk, is that last one, which is that role model or that subject matter expert, that person who can get into the details, get into the nitty gritty. You know, when I talk about engineers, I'm like, there's the engineers that sit at the keyboard, and then there's the engineers that have that little bit of grit underneath their fingernails. Those are two very different style of engineers. And when you have that engineer as that grit, is that person who's been out in the field, who has that experience, who's that subject matter expert, and you're going to be able to rely on giving you that, boots on the ground style data.
No, yeah, and I would agree with that, right? Because of technology today, it's easy to become a subject matter expert at things and never had true in the field experience. And we have to be careful with that. There's a lot of power in knowledge, true, but nothing can replace the getting your, to use your example, getting the fingernails, the grit, and getting the hands dirty, to use a cliche phrase. And, when you live through the things and you don't just go through the experience, but you carry all the emotion with it.
No,
and that can be challenging.
Yeah, that actually, it's a really interesting thought process, because I always wonder, can somebody coach on something they don't have subject matter expert on?
Well, I would say they can. Now, that doesn't mean they'll be good at it, because it's going to come from a position of knowledge, but it won't come from experience. Like, you take subjects in academia today, and I'm not judging academia here, but it's been well documented that, hey, there's professors out there teaching on subjects, but they've never actually done the thing. And real estate is no exception. There's people out there that have taught real estate, but have they ever gone and felt the weight of, shoot, this deal went bad, and now, for whatever reason, and there's consequences, and how do we clean it up, and we got to live with it and fix it, and yada, yada. Like, that's a very different experience from, oh yeah, it was supposed to work and something went wrong, and oh well, I guess we'll just do another one.
Well, I think that brings into a great movie. It was Good Will Hunting, where Robin Williams is talking to Matt Damon and talking about Matt Damon is quoting all this stuff, and Robin Williams is like, but you can quote all me the things about the Mona Lisa, but did you actually see it? Did you see the texture? Did you experience the room that it was in? Did you go to the Sistine Chapel, and did you smell the air? Did you taste the humidity? And it's a very different experience when you have that tangible connection to the actual experience itself, rather than the theoretical connection to the result.
It's funny you mentioned the Mona Lisa, because you took me back to when I visited the Getty Center in LA many years ago. And there just so happened to be a little, event or something going on when we went. And we totally went casually. I was with my kids, and the kids were like, hey, that building looks cool. Let's go up there. So we did, and it turned out to be this museum, and it was a cool experience.
That's amazing.
But you walk through that, and I'm looking at all this artwork. And of course, to people that love art, it was magnificent. But I'm not an art person. In fact, when I was in college, that was truly my most boring course. No offense to the artists. I like it more now than I did when I was in college. I will say that. But, to me, it's like, oh, that's a cool picture or not a cool picture. But do I really stop and appreciate all those little things the way someone that loves art does? No, and I will happily admit that's not me. But real estate's no different. Like, when you get into real estate, if you go into it and you've never done construction work, you're just thinking, well, we started here, we need to finish here. Did we hit the budget? We hit the timeline. Oh my gosh. It's just, but until you're in the thick of it with your contractors, and you're seeing the pain, you see how hard they work, you see the sweat coming off their face, it's hard to appreciate it. And the thing is, you could see it and still not appreciate it.
Yeah, and that actually, it's an interesting perspective around the dichotomy between experience and knowledge. What you're saying is you went to the art gallery, so therefore check mark on the experience. You've crossed that Matt Damon threshold into the Robin Williams space, but you don't have the Robin Williams knowledge to say, I can actually appreciate it. And so the balanced scorecard approach of saying, I need to have the knowledge coupled with the experience is what truly gives you that connection to that.
Yeah, if you can just gain enough to where you can appreciate it, that's the key. I mean, nowadays with AI, you can learn about, it seems like anything, right? Like not literally, but it sure does seem like it. But to learn to appreciate things, even if you don't enjoy them, if you can just appreciate the effort that people put in, even if you can't relate to it, just the appreciation, if you can just get that, it makes the experience much better. And it's easier to be very clear and honest and say, you know what? I'm so glad that you love this and this is your I had this conversation actually a month ago with someone. I was in a room with specific contractors for a specific trade, and this person I was with absolutely loved it. And they're like, what'd you think? I was like, that's cool. But was I going to appreciate it the way they did? No, because it wasn't my vibe. Now, I appreciate it. I understand the work. I understand the effort. But am I going to be like, oh, man, it was so awesome? No.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember
because
when
it's not me.
The first time that I built out this one, we used to do construction of very large luxury homes and, 20 to 55,000 square foot homes. And I would always make sure that when people are soldering, there was no drips. I'd always make sure there's a level for every pipe. I'd always make sure that if there was threaded pipe, that there was no little stick picks skipping out. Everything had to be perfect. And then you'd have that homeowner who would come in and go, well, that looks nice. And then they walk out. You're like, do you know how much time it took me to choose that specific pump, to make it variable speed. So it handled some, modified pressure drops and all that. And it was just for, oh, that looks nice. And so then I was like, there's a lot of other people out in the world that do a lot of work. And I'm going to pick on real estate agents for a moment, because I see this happen. And when you talk about an 80% failure rate to 90% failure rate, I think it's because a lot of people get into the industry and they think you just got to be really good at like pointing at the countertops and saying, look at the pretty curtains, and don't realize that there's a professionalism that's required for this industry. And most of those people didn't really realize that when they got in the front.
Well, we've built some houses over the years. We've built in a number of styles. And, you bring up the realtors. And by the way, I had a wonderful experience with a group of realtors here recently. But I've also had the experience where they walked through a house, brand new home, and you've put in the sweat, right? Now I didn't build 20,000 square feet, but the effort is the effort, right? And 20,000, it's the same thing I did magnified, right? Because it's just bigger. Yep. And a higher level. But the thing is, it is frustrating because realtors, some of them will walk through, not all of them, but some of them will walk through and they're like, oh, well, the house isn't perfect. And it's like, it's man-made. It will never be 100% perfect. I mean, it didn't be close. Yep. But if man
just like they are, they're man-made and they'll never be perfect too.
Yeah, and so most agents, but most buyers, most people, period, have never built a house by far. So it's difficult for them to appreciate it. And so we have to I had to learn to set this expectation on myself of self. 99% of the people who look at this house have never built a house. I can't expect them to appreciate it and the effort we put in the way that would, quote unquote, make me happy. It's not going to work out because I'm asking them to appreciate something they've never done, and that's not fair to them.
Yeah. So how do you handle that then?
You just have to reset your expectation, is what I did. I don't know if that's the right answer, but that's what I did. I had to say, self, if they don't appreciate it, that's okay. If the realtor comes in, to use your example, and says, oh, nice countertop, and that's the best they got, I got to be okay with that. That's the game. I chose to build. I chose to put in however long it took to build this thing, all the work, all the sweat. Like, I chose to. They didn't tell me to do it. They'll just go to another house where I'm a remodel or homeowner for all they care, right? Like, I chose to do that. So, and I got to know, well, hey, not everyone might appreciate it, but isn't that life? We all do things that, guess what? Not everyone's going to appreciate it. It's okay. We need to If they haven't walked it, they haven't walked it.
I remember, with early in my relationship with my wife, and maybe sometimes recently, but we'll talk about early because it sounds like I've improved. When you come into the house and dinner was made, house is impeccably clean, and you come into the house and you're like, you sit down, eat dinner, and then you go out to the office. And for some reason, for the next 3 days, she's miffed at you and you don't know why. And it's because you didn't show appreciation for it. And then, that happens a couple times. And then you realize, hey, well, maybe, what, I should show some appreciation because this is a lifelong endeavor. But then further to that is you say, maybe we should be looking for the appreciation internally. We don't do it for somebody else. We do it for ourselves. And I think when I looked at the pipe inside the mechanical room, when we were laying out all the hydronic piping, I never changed in fact, I kept on trying to get better every single time. And I realized I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for me. And that made it so much easier. When they just walked out, I just realized, well, that's okay. They don't understand. And it's perfectly fine to be able to say they don't understand.
When it comes to appreciation, in particular of relationship, I've learned that old school works really well. So this Christmas, a friend of mine, he's up in Canada, sent a Christmas card. I didn't know he was going to send a Christmas card. They sent a Christmas card. And you know what? I got plenty of Christmas cards, but that one resonated wonderfully. And now there was nothing particularly amazing about the card, but just the fact that, oh, my guy out in Canada sent me a card, hadn't seen him in months, and it just resonated. And so we can't underestimate the power of some of those old school little touches that just go a really long way.
There's speaking of Canada, I have a mortgage brokerage in Canada, and there's another mortgage broker who I always, I really like the dude. His name's David Usby, and he's so well known for just that one thing of sending out cards at the right time to that person. Sometimes it's not even the right time; it's just sending the card. But he does all of these personal touches to make that relationship so good, and he's so darn good at it. Now he is, later in his years. And he's learned that, as you say, it's an old school way. So for him, it's been an all school way because he's done that throughout his whole career. And he's built up a big, beautiful business. But those little touches, I think, are so critically important.
Well, it reminds us that we're human. And, when I got this particular card, the thing that I thought to myself was, you know what, Frank? It pays to slow down a little bit and smell the roses. So I'll go on mountain drives with my wife, or my kids, or some of these car rallies I go to. And my wife, when I go with her, we go a little slower. And so
that's a give, right?
And she says, look at all the, and I'm paraphrasing, but look at all the beautiful landscape that we're passing, right? It's just perspective. Like for me, I'm out there go, right. It's like a roller coaster kind of thing. But to her, it's look at this beautiful countryside that we're not seeing. And there's a lot of power in slowing down. And so I then went to the mountains a few months ago. I was actually on my way up north. And on the way back, I decided to go through one of these really curvy roads in my truck.
No.
Not exact, and it's an older truck, like 8-foot bed. I mean, this is not a sporty truck by any stretch. And as I was going through the roads, first of all, I was clearly going slower, which was totally fine. But I was noticing things that I'd never noticed. And if we can just do that a little bit each day and just stop in the middle of the busyness of the day and be like, okay, what just happened? Let me appreciate what's happened today. And I've learned it's okay to take short little breaks in the day and, to paraphrase, smell the roses and appreciate what is going on the day and appreciate the opportunities to come. And also, if there was any negativity, rinse that out. And because rinsing negativity, I've learned, is something that I underestimated for far too long. Yeah. And it just makes the day so much better and fresher.
There's so many things to unpack there. The first thing was, number one, is perspective and the power of perspective. As you said, you're driving down the road and you're feeling the vibe, your connection to that powerful machine, and you're like, I'm loving this thing. And she's like, oh man, is that a birch or is that looking outside the window and really gaining the perspective there. Then what you did is you took that and turned it to introspection, which you said you looked inside yourself and said, well, maybe I should find something else that I haven't seen. And you changed your perspective on some of these things. And you start to realize and see things that you haven't seen before. So having a strong perspective gives you a strong understanding, but being introspective enough to say, I'm willing to look at something different. I think that's powerful right there in what you just said.
A few years ago, I went to the mountains on one such drive, and we found this wonderful little road, and it opened up to a field, and almost immediately there was this pond off to the side, and they were fly fishing there. Now, we could have just blew right through there, but we wouldn't have because, right, there's people. We're going to absolutely slow down, safety, of course, right, without question. But we didn't have to stop, and we drove by it, and we're like, wait a minute, cool mountain view, little pond, people doing stuff, stop, turn around, and go back. And so we went back. Now, I don't fly fish. I don't even fish. To me, it's a very boring sport. But it didn't matter because it was just the vibe of the environment in the moment. And that's exactly what it is. We stopped. It was very quiet other than, hearing these little things and the fish is popping in and out of the water. But otherwise, and there's these mountains all around you and you're just like, this is just cool moment.
Yeah, that moment I think it was River Runs Through It, where the guy's fly fishing. And just the visual of that is just something that I think is really stunning and magical. And I think he was up in the mountains too. So I imagine it had that same sort of experience. And I think that'd be so interesting.
Well, we can apply that to our everyday business. And that's really the key, is just when we apply that, the day just goes better. And even just today, I put a post out on social media where I was like, what happens when you get a deal in a market you don't know? And so I wrote what I just did, and I actually just executed this literally a few days ago. I put a post in social media because the deal looked good, but I'm like, I don't know this market. So I think it's good, but is it really good? So I put out a post in a group and saying, hey, I'm just looking for realtors that can help, right? And I went in there thinking I was going to get, 3, 4 responses. Who's this Frank guy, right? Had 20 responses. I spoke to them, and we're not done yet. I've spoken with 16 on the phone so far. Now, and I was like, this is cool because here's a few things I learned. I actually put in the post all the things I learned, but to start, to condense it, it was like, first of all, I found 16 people gracious enough to want to share their time, which was really cool. And I got 16 perspectives on a market. That's a lot of really good information.
Yeah.
I got all this information about the types of investments, who goes there, the price points, what are the risks, what are the challenges, what are the highlights. And I sat there, and by the way, some of them have sent me additional opportunities, more than I can actually count. So I'm just like, oh my gosh. Now, are they all good? I don't know. We put something out there, and all of a sudden, it was such a strong reminder of self. There's still a lot of people out there that are really good people that just love to serve.
And serving can be pragmatic in the way that you get so fulfilled from it. I mean, the idea is, there was a guy, Grant Cardone, he talks a lot about this. He says that, in any transaction, there's a commission. Now, the commission, a lot of people first think money, but the commission can come in many different forms. Like, if I just feel good in giving you information, that's commission. If I get a trade of information, like what we're doing right now in this podcast, we're trading information. I'm learning. Hopefully I'm sharing something with you as well. And we're getting this trade. That's earning a commission. That's earning some knowledge. And I think a lot of people don't realize that you can get so much out of giving.
No, 100%, 100%. And, now it's like, if they send me a deal, I'm just like, oh my gosh, yeah. Like, you feel like you have to look at it, whether it's good or bad, doesn't even matter, because they just took the time. Again, it goes back to the idea of just slow down, appreciate Don't think of someone sending you a deal as, oh, they sent me an email. Oh, they sent me, like it's like an obligation or a technical transaction. It's, look, somebody took the time to share with you one-on-one. Now, could they have shared it with someone else? They could have, but whether they did or didn't, they took the time to share with you.
Yeah, and that's really important because the one thing that we have that's an absolute and finite amount is the time that we have on this planet.
Yes.
And if we're investing it in somebody, that's an investment, and that's a good thing. And to get something up, but the idea, I want to jump back on the idea of deals, and I want to talk about that because a deal is really important. When you talk about a good deal, we talked a little bit about risk. I mean, there's so many different type of deals out there. And when we're talking about investing in real estate, people are like, should I be going out and buying something that is turnkey? Should I buy something and do the burst strategy of buying it and flipping it, buying it and holding it? Or should I go out and just build something? And I know you've kind of hit all those different components of the real estate element. Can we shed a little bit of light on some of, the opportunity and risks in each of those categories?
Yeah. At a high level, when I'm looking at a real estate deal, it used to be I looked at the profit potential because that's what's pitched, right? You go to the seminar, look at how much money you can make. Look at how wonderful your life can be. That's how it's pitched, right? The whole 9 yards. We get it. Okay. And that was before the TV shows. Now you have the TV shows and everybody is a Home Depot ninja, right? Like, and then until they're not. So, which is sadly most people. But what I learned is we don't want to discount that because that is the exciting part, right? Because let's face it, if all you do is focus on risk and not the exciting part, it's not going to be a very exciting venture, right? Because you'll probably never do anything because you'll be scared. So you want the excitement of the profit potential, and maybe it's a project that resonates with you. And I'm using the example of flipping. It could be a buy and hold. It could be cash flow, whatever it is. But we want to assess the risk side of it as well, because one of the worst feelings is when you are so excited, you make decisions, and what was so exciting now became your nightmare. And that has happened, and I've personally lived it to the point where when we had our down moment, as I like to call it, it almost made me question me as a person. And it really brought me to light with this idea of an event does not define you. And a lot of times, and it happened to me, is it's easy to let a deal define you. It's not. It's just a moment in time, right? Just like a fantastic deal doesn't mean every deal you touch is going to be gold. That's not reality.
Yeah. And both of those are super dangerous. If you become super skittish because you have a deal go bad, you're going to miss a lot of opportunities. And if you think you're the cat's meow because you had that one hit wonder, you're going to fade away like Milli Vanilli.
Right. And so disconnecting our identity from the deal is incredibly critical. And it's easy to say when you're doing great, it's easy to say that. When it's dark, we're human beings, right? And when we get in a dark spot, crazy stuff starts flowing around your mind, and you start believing nonsense, and then you're hearing negativity from the outside and yada yada, and you realize, wait a second, I'm not a bad person. I didn't go into this. We just had a bad event. But here's the good news. That's all it was. And us making it worse than that does not help. So we got to disconnect it. Just like if we go do a deal, and here's an interesting experience. We did a deal once a few years ago where we was very profitable. And I experienced the other side. I didn't even care because the effort didn't match the profit. So on paper, it was like, oh, it was a great deal, but it didn't feel good. So it didn't matter.
Felt like unearned privilege.
What's that?
It felt like an unearned privilege, almost like you got all of this profit, but you didn't see where it came from.
Well, it just didn't reflect the effort. Like it's like for all the work we put in, that's all we got.
On the other side, that it
It
came
was like, oh, whatever. There wasn't this, and maybe it was a little bit of, you could even argue, well, maybe you were a little bit immature and you should appreciate everything. And there's probably some truth to that as well, right? Again, we're very imperfect people. But the thing is, at the end of the day, you can have what looks like on paper a great deal and find that it's not fulfilling. You can on paper have something that would be a catastrophe, but you end up finding out with the right perspective, it's actually your launch pad.
Yeah. Kobe Bryant talks a lot about this. He talks about, are you playing to win? Or are you playing not to lose? Or are you just playing? And he plays that I'm just playing. Because in that moment, if I'm playing to win, it's a very different strategy. You can have a lot of blinders on. If you're playing not to lose, you're going to be missing a lot of opportunities. But if you're just playing, then that's a whole different way of looking at things. And I think that comes down to things where people can have systems and models that create success. So they operate in a way that they're in operation, they're in execution. They're not in like discovery where they're trying to find things. Because when you're discovering, you're trying to find things, that's where, emotions can happen and those types of things can take away. And you're actually not going to execute at the highest level because, to the degree of the level of stress you're experiencing is the inverse is to your performance. The higher the stress, the lower you're going to perform. The higher the emotion, sometimes the lower you're going to perform.
Yeah, I would say the higher the emotion, it's almost guaranteed that the decision making is going to go downhill. And I've seen it, like we're all human beings, like none of us is immune to this. And, so going back to the deal, if you can disconnect emotion from the deal. Now, everybody says, oh, it's just investing, it's just business. Great. Those are all wonderful things. Here's the real world. You're a human being. You're not AI. You're not a robot. You're a human being with real emotions. And, and I learned that this concept of thick skin doesn't mean like you're just necessarily a tough guy. It means, hey, you can disconnect emotion from the transaction, which is absolutely paramount. Because once emotion gets mixed into a deal, just crazy things can predictably happen. And it is predictable. It's extremely predictable. It's as predictable as the sun coming up tomorrow. That's how predictable it is. If you let emotion get involved in your perspective, if you let emotion get involved on that quote unquote bad thing or that good thing, it's the same either way. So it doesn't mean we can't enjoy it. It doesn't mean we don't recognize the emotions because, again, we have to acknowledge them. But I love the book, The Obstacle is the Way. I love that book because of the simple couple of pages where it's like, look, and I'm paraphrasing, there's the event, and we get to define what that event means. Now, we've been conditioned up to that event to think, right? But in reality, we also have the ability at any given moment to break away from our conditioning and say, wait a minute, this deal or this life event, because it can apply to anything, normally it means this, but what if we pause for a moment and let's let the emotion filter down? Let's reconsider what's really going on. Because events are just events.
Yeah, well, I mean, you got to question yourself. Are your emotions working for you, or are you working for your emotions? And if you're working for your emotions, yeah, that's a tough position to be in.
Yeah, right? It is.
You got to be in control, and if you're in control of them, you choose when you're going to respond with, an elevated moment. You're going to choose if you respond that whether it's elation or anger or whatever you're going to use, but you're going to actually actively choose when you're going to do that. And I think some people think that's mechanical, but I think it means that you have agency to your decision making.
Well, I'm going to use an example of wholesalers for a moment. Now, I love my wholesalers out there, right? Because we bought from, let's face it, wholesaling is a tough gig. And I've done a good bit of it in the past, but it's a lot of work. So I have total respect for the ones that work hard at it, and they really are working to build their craft. What typically happens is when I put I'm the buyer hat on, I'll get a deal from a wholesaler. And again, I appreciate them because I understand and been there, done it many times. Okay. That's a sales and marketing gig, and it's a lot of work. And they'll send me a deal. I look at the deal and I'll say, okay, I'm interested. I take a look, and then I decide this would be I try to be respectful and be like, you know what? I don't think I'm going to offer it. It's going to be too low, and I don't want to waste your time. I don't know. Give me your best. Let me know what you can do, which I appreciate. I'm glad they're saying that, because that means they're saying, I'm open. Great. So kudos to them. So I was like, okay. So I give them the offer. Oh, no, Frank. No. Wait. Like, what are you thinking? Are you on crack? Like, what's wrong? Right. And then the emotion, and you can see it a mile away. The emotion comes in, and I try to get them on the phone so we can dissipate it faster. Sometimes they try to do this over text. I'm like, that's just a disaster. Get off
totally.
freaking text. Get on the phone. And then you hear it, and it's like you almost have to work through it with them and be like, dude, I appreciate what you're doing. Thanks for sending me the deal. This is just the reason why I'm at. Now, if you get someone else can do a better, great, no problem. I'm good. Just, I ain't mad at you. But I see that a lot with wholesalers that are in particular not very experienced, where the emotion comes in. Like, I can't believe you would think differently. And I'm like, welcome to planet Earth. We're all a little different, right? I don't know. There's a bunch of weird people on this planet. By the way, you're one of them. I think all of us are. And so, it's okay. Like, the faster we can filter through that emotion, the faster there's a shot at deals being made. Another example I could give is one that we recently did where, again, it was wholesaler. There was an initial surge of emotion. We worked through it. And now the guy's like, Frank, you're great. And I'm just like, I don't know that I'm great. But what I do know is I understand that in every deal, don't be surprised if there's an initial communication. There's an elevation of emotion because now we're talking about transacting and there's some disagreement. But if we can work through that, a lot of times it'll settle down. I've always said this, how many deals die because either a wholesaler or a realtor got elevated and just didn't work through it?
Yep. Yeah. Well, it's even when the deal's been struck, and, the furnace breaks before close, or, some problem arises, and people's emotions all get out of check. And where two level heads could have prevailed at that moment, it turns into this big embattled moment that nobody wins. Yeah. And I think the idea is to go in it with that level head and said, we're here to win. And if we can win together, that's the best win. So let's win together. That doesn't mean you're going to get everything that you want, Mr. Seller, but that means that you're going to get the deal that's going to happen. That's going to give you the things that you can get right now.
Well, here's a little fun tip, piggybacking off of that. As a man, I am married, been married 26 plus years at this point.
Congratulations.
And so, thank you. And there have been times where, again, Frank decided to be a human being and get a little bit emotionally elevated. Not like yelling or anything, just you get in your feelings, so to speak. And my wife will gently say, you just need to chill and focus on this. Like, I understand all this, and just focus on this is all you need to worry about and nothing else. Let the rest go. And so to my gentlemen listeners, and I don't know, I guess it works in reverse as well. Maybe when you're feeling that moment in a deal, talk to your spouse, because she might give you a little, just that gentle nudge that makes you go, you're right. And now you're back in a great place and you can pick up the conversation.
Well, and know the times to negotiate that deal. I mean, a lot of real estate agents, they make the big mistake of, make the irrevocable until 11 o'clock at night. Now people are negotiating a deal back and forth at 10:30. They're tired. Maybe they didn't have dinner because the negotiation went all through dinner, and people aren't operating as their best self. Maybe put that offer to expire at 5 o'clock. And so that people are negotiating during the day. I know for me, we have a policy in our house that if my wife and I have a disagreement, if it's after 9 o'clock, it's not going to be solved. It's going to get solved the next day. Because if it's 9:30, 10 o'clock, and both of us are really tired, we're not going to be our best self to try to figure out the problem.
No, that's so true. And piggybacking off of that, one of the things that will frustrate me sometimes is we'll be selling a house, a realtor will send an offer. And let's say they send it at 6 o'clock one day. Okay, I got to have an answer by 2 in the afternoon tomorrow. And it's this really short timeline. Well, and I get it, right? The short timeline is to inspire action and to get a quick, I get that. But there's this thing called life, and we need to be sometimes a little more cognizant and respectful of the fact that others have one. You know, that seller, or maybe if you're the buyer and you're offering to the seller, you know, this is a bi-directional thing, right? People have commitments. People have things going on. And, you know, does that mean that it's not important if they can't get to you? No. But some things are ultimately more important. Like maybe they have a family commitment. Well, you know what? Some people are not going to bend their family commitment over a deal. They're just not. But then some people will be like, oh my gosh, but then, you know, it's not that important to you. No, it's important. It's just not the most important. So I think it's important that when you're negotiating, we've gotten into this text message mentality of, we gotta figure this out in 5 seconds. If I don't see those little ellipses moving on my phone, we're not serious, right? So no, we give people time to be human and process and respond. You don't know what one detail was in your offer or counter offer that either set somebody off if it was negative, or that they got to work through, or that made them say, you know what? Let's think about that. Like, you just don't know. We got to just give each other time to be human.
Yeah.
It's real important.
I agree with that. You know, there was a podcast I did a little while ago, and this guy, I give him a lot of credit. The one thing I love about podcasting, and I'm just going to break for a moment. The one thing I truly love about podcasting, guys, is I get to sit in conversations just like the conversation we're having today. And not only do I get to meet somebody new, a great individual that I can learn from, but I can actually learn from them. That's the thing, is I can sit here and I can learn from him. One of the things that I learned from another guy is he talked about margin, not in the form of, you know, on the P&L, the profit and loss, but in the form of your schedule, is to build in margin. And to hear that resonated again, I think we're running into a theme here, especially given the way that things are moving at so fast pace, is the idea that if you could schedule margin into your day and say, I need some time that I'm just going to use for myself and focus on whatever it is, read a book, go for a walk, do some yoga, whatever you need to do for that moment, or just really just think. That's a truly important thing to do.
You know, I use this piece of paper where I write down my daily schedule, and I rarely get to all of it. And I used to get so frustrated. And then I realized I know why I can't get to all of it, because I have to interact with people. Mm-hmm. And it's not always going to go perfectly, or, this conversation came up, or this thing happened that needed my attention, or whatever. And granted, yes, we can keep out a lot of the distractions, but some things you can't keep out, right? Some things do need to be dealt with in that moment. And so I've learned that not only to maybe, as you know, and I agree, put margin in your schedule, but give each item in it a little more breathing room. Okay? Give it a little more breathing room. Now, some things do need to be short and sweet. No, right? That doesn't mean everything gets an hour block. Not at all. But, when once you've done real estate for a while, and I think you could say this for any business, really, once you do anything for a while, you know which things are going to need more breathing space than others. Yeah. Whatever your field of expertise is, okay, when I touch X, I'm going to plan for this, but you just know it could go longer. My kids would always hate when I took them to houses. I'd be like, Dad said we're going to go for an hour. It's never an hour.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we learned that if my kids were going to, and this was years ago, but if I was going to take them to the house, if I was going to be an hour, I'd tell them to. And then when it was 1:45, then, yeah, oh, Dad was less than 2. That was Some dad.
Amazing.
Go get ice cream.
Exactly. That's amazing. That's amazing. And taking the kids, just as a segue, did taking the kids to those houses really help them develop and grow as individuals?
So I think one of the things my kids have taken away, and they're young adults now, but they're still, they're in their 20s. They're still young. But the one thing I love is they both clearly have a good work ethic. Okay, they've definitely gotten the work ethic. Now, I will tell you, they've looked at real estate. I don't think they're too sure about it. They're not sold on that. And I don't necessarily blame them either. So, and I'm okay with that. It's totally fine. But my goal was not for them to necessarily like real estate. And if they don't, I'm totally good with it. What I want them to understand is whatever you're going to set your mind to, work hard. That's first thing. And then the second thing is, when something good happens, really appreciate it. And I think that's one of the hardest ones for them to learn, right? Especially today where everything seems to come so easy. That, to really appreciate when things go well. And then the third thing they've learned is when we went through a dark period, they saw how we went through that challenge. And they're like, I had to learn. I mean, that's when you really, really had to figure out, dude, I need to be a better me so the kids see what's going on. It don't matter one iota what anyone outside of the Iglesias household is thinking at that point, because it's how are the kids seeing dad go through a tough time? How is he responding?
Everybody can be an amazing individual when life is easy, but when life gets hard, who are we at that moment? And it was actually interesting because you can take the inverse of that, where people have a bad money mindset because they think about wealth as, oh, it's going to change me. Just like going through a hard situation, going through a really, really, really good situation, like we mentioned earlier, can do the exact same thing, just on the inverse perspective. People are like, oh, I might become vain. I might become this. It's like, well, maybe you already are. You just haven't been given the opportunity to do that. And so maybe you got to do some self-reflection on that and fix that now, because if you want to be successful, it's going to just present what you already are.
Well, when I coach people, one thing I've learned is, and it's the 80-20 rule, or 90-10, whichever percentage you want to pick. So much of what we talk about is dealing with the person. The nuts and bolts of houses, don't get me wrong, there's lots of details, lots of things to learn and so forth. But in the, looking back, that's the easy part. It's the easy part. I mean, it's just data. At the end of the day, you're just learning data. Yeah, we would do new construction, and I don't mean to offend anyone that might be listening, but this is just the way Frank thinks. After you build enough houses, you're just like, look, it's just 4 walls and a roof. Now, some have fancier walls and roofs than the others, and that's totally cool. But at the end of the day, 4 walls and a roof. And we can learn the mechanics that go into that, and the artistic and yada, and all of that is wonderful. But the vast majority of our time doing this thing called real estate investing is really developing us as a person. And that's a lot of hard work.
Well, I think anything that's worth something requires hard work. Just when we talk about earning the right to win, a lot of times, if it's a big win, it's going to be something over adversity, something over that's a big challenge, which means there's hard work. I mean, other than George Costanza writing an episode about nothing on Seinfeld, most great movies and most great stories are about somebody's overcoming very difficult things. And so it is hard work. But at the end of that is where the reward lies.
Is not only is it hard work, but every person we come across, we have the opportunity to appreciate their hard work. I go back to, for example, earlier when I talked to 16 realtors, the quality of that conversation varied from person to person. That's normal. They're all different, right? But the one thing I heard in all of them that I appreciated was every single one of them, I could tell, cared about what they did. And you could tell they worked hard at it. And so some of the things some of them offered, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm gonna get a red carpet tour here or something. Right? But it seems like that's crazy, but it's like, no, they they value that. And it's just, if we can just, to use that word for you mentioned earlier, margin, build in that margin of time to just appreciate others' hard work. That's powerful.
It is very powerful. Well, I can tell you I've appreciated the hard work that you've put in to becoming you, being able to share all the information for people to learn today. Really, we covered a lot of topics around the idea of coaching, around the idea of perspective, real estate, and about just developing our relationships with the people around us. I think it's been a wonderful podcast having you on the show. And I want people to know, how can they get a hold of you? If they're looking and saying, you know what, I love what you were talking about. I love the idea. Maybe I want to learn a little bit more. I want to get a little bit of perspective. Where can they go?
Yeah. So, the easy answer, of course, we're on, if you Google my name, real estate, we're on all the social media. So you can always find me on one of those platforms, or you could go to my website, frankiglesias.com. Or we did use the phrase old school. We do answer the phone. And if you leave a message, we will call back. 678-408-2228. Calling is always better than texting. But if you have to text, it's okay. We can text. I get it. Some people are more comfortable with that. It's cool. Right? As long as we can connect, I'm happy to talk to anybody and, hopefully be a value add to them.
Well, that's the one thing I love about podcasting, guys, is you get to build great connections with great people. And Frank, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. Truly appreciate it. And guys, this is the money. This is the mindset. This is the Mentoring Podcast. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you on the next one.